All right, the title says it all. Odds are you don't need 1 gigabit per second internet. Maybe your internet service provider has been trying to get you to upgrade, pay $70 a month more, but odds are you don't need all that. Today we're going to explain why. Here's how this program is going to work. Instead of trying to yap at you the whole time and explain to you exactly why, we're going to work through a set of problems, and hopefully the problems will show you why you don't need 1 gigabit per second internet. We're going to start, though, with some networking fundamentals, and then we're going to move on and talk about the actual networking behind it. There are 4 fundamental sources of delay when talking about computer networks, and they are listed in order here: transmission delay, propagation delay, processing, and queuing delay. Some of them are more relevant than the others. They're more worthwhile to drag our attention to. And those two are transmission and propagation delay, and let's talk about them. Transmission delay is how long it takes to put all of the bits from a packet on the wire. Think of it like trying to put as much water as you can into a hose. If you have some amount of water that you need to put into a hose, the amount of time that it takes to put that water in the hose, that's a transmission delay. And it's determined by how large your packet is, so how much water you have to get in the hose, and how much water the hose can actually hold. Or more accurately, how fast it can get water in it. Now we got to consider how long it takes us to actually send the water to the other side of the hose, and even to get it back. That's propagation delay. Now, propagation delay is how long it takes our packet, well, really a single bit, to reach the other side and come back to us. And it's basically bounded by the speed of light and the length of the wire. So longer wire, going to take longer to get down the wire. And speed of light is because we're basically fiber optic cables. We're sending photons down the wire. Now, with copper cables, it's electrons, so they're a little slower, but they're still real fast. Now let's talk about processing delay. Now, processing delay is the time that it takes to receive the packet and process it. Now, we already factored in reception time when we talked about transmission, and you can convince yourself that that is true. But basically, we don't need to consider processing delay as long as the processing delay is shorter than the transmission time. Why is that? Because we can process packets faster than we can receive them. That means we don't actually have to include it. There's no extra overhead there. We just do them both at the same time. And the last piece of this all is queuing delay. Queuing delay is when there are too many packets and they all arrive at once, and you can't send them all at once, so they have to wait. It's the equivalent of being stopped at a red light. You just gotta wait your turn. It's determined by how many packets are in the network. I'm telling you, when I tell you that queuing theory is some voodoo magic, it really is. Queuing theory is ridiculous. If you are good at queuing theory, I really support you and your hardships. But we are going to assume that there is no queuing, and as you'll see later, even if we added queuing, that wouldn't be a knock for upgrading your internet connection. That would be a knock against it. Now, let's start with the problems. Now, we've discussed that. So basically, the only 2 kinds of delay that we're going to talk about are propagation and transmission delay. Problem 1. Calculate the transmission delay of sending 5 kilobytes down a 10 megabit per second link. If you have ever done any calculations about distance and velocity, this is going to be a pretty easy problem. All we're going to do is divide 5 kilobytes by 10 megabits per second, and then 100, and then 1 gigabit per second. And that's going to be the transmission delay. So for 10 megabits per second, you'll see that 5 kilobytes is actually 20,000 bits. That's 5 times 8 bits per byte times 1,000 kilobits per bit. And then divided by 10 million bits per second, we get 2 milliseconds. So it will take 2 milliseconds to put 5 kilobytes on the line. And you'll see that number decreases by a factor of 10 as we increase the bandwidth by a factor of 10. Okay, that's all well and good, but not many of y'all can tell the difference between 2 milliseconds and 200 microseconds, and we're going to see here in problem 2 what that actually does to us. Now, assume we have 20 milliseconds round trip time to some server. It could be any server. I don't care what it is. It could be Minecraft or it could be google.com. I don't care. Ignore all handshaking. I'm telling you, there is more voodoo magic going on at the transport and network layer we don't need to talk about right now. And assume the size of the HTTP requests. That is, when you connect, you send a small little request to the server to get information, and we're not going to talk about it. How long will it take to download the 5 kilobytes on each of the links from question 1? If you'll remember, that was 10 megabits per second, 100 megabits per second, 1 gigabit per second. Start jotting down your answers now. Let's continue. Now, the math is pretty simple. It's always going to take us 20 milliseconds to send and receive a single bit. And then we have to add in the 2 milliseconds of transmission delay for the 5 kilobytes that we want. And the same logic applies for both of the other ones. So you'll see it's basically always 20 milliseconds. So upgrading your connection here didn't make a difference, did it? We ain't ever going to get faster than 20 milliseconds. It's just not possible. Now, you are downloading a huge file. You are downloading a 4 gigabyte movie. I could have even done like, you're downloading GTA 6, and it is 20 gigabytes. And you're doing it on a 10 megabit per second link. Could you imagine how much torture that would be? In fact, let's calculate how much torture that would be. So how about it? We're going to use the same round trip time from problem 2. How long will that take? For 10 megabits per second. Goo! Woo! Hoo, hoo, hoo. So 20 milliseconds plus 32 gigabytes divided by 10 megabits per second is 3,200 seconds. Golly, that's 53 minutes and 40 seconds. That's insane. Insane. It's just so long because we have slow link for 100 megabits per second. And now it's 5 minutes, 40 seconds. So it went from 50 minutes to 5 minutes. Well, chopped it down like by 10, so it's the 10th of the time because you increased your connection speed by tenfold. And now we're going to do it again. For 1 gigabit, it's only going to take us 52 seconds. That's pretty good. So, the total latency varies with the inverse of the throughput. But the astute among you may notice that because of this property, as throughput goes to infinity, the total latency does not approach 0. It approaches the round trip time. You will never be faster than the round trip time. However, as we just saw, with big file sizes, you get significant speed increases. You get faster download times. Now, problem 4. Yeah, so this is a common problem. A lot of y'all suck at games, and you blame your ping and your lag, and you say, I want to upgrade my connection speed. Well, let's do it. Let's see the effect of that. Let's say you play a game like Minecraft, for example, that connects to a server, and you're debating whether or not increasing your maximum throughput would affect your latency, i.e. going from 100 megabits to 1 gigabit. You send a 500 byte update to the server, and it sends a 500 byte acknowledgement back. Those numbers are arbitrary. They could be 50 bytes. They could be 5,000 bytes. It doesn't really matter that much. You can just redo this problem with those numbers. How would your ping change from 100 megabits per second to 1 gigabit per second with 20 millisecond round trip time? Again, that's a very generous round trip time. Very generous indeed. Well, let's see. First, let's simplify the problem because that's a little bit of a doozy. So you send a request. It goes through some network, doesn't matter what, and it gets to the server, and the server sends you a response. And all of that happens, and if we were to send a bit along that path, it would take 20 milliseconds to come back to us. So, now that we've got a better idea of the actual architecture here, let's do the math. So, 20 milliseconds, remember, we always need to add that, plus 8,000 bits, so that's 500, that's 2 times the 500 bytes that we're sending, plus, like, times 8 for bits per byte, divided by 100 megabits per second, that's 20.08 milliseconds. So that's a ping of 20, we say. And then 20 milliseconds plus 8,000 bytes over 1 gigabit per second, that's 20.008. You saved 72 microseconds. That's probably how long you last in bed, frankly. You can't even tell the difference. All right, but now let's get a little bit more extreme. Let's assume that more people are using your network than just you and your degenerate hobbies. Let's assume you've got a family of 5 who all want to stream 1080p 60 video at the same time, and they will each need 4 megabits per second. How much bandwidth do you need in total? It's pretty simple. You just multiply by 5. 4 megabits per second times 5 people, that's 20 megabits per second. In real life, you can really only expect about 88% link usage, so you'd probably need closer to 25 megabits per second. That's just the way it is. And in future lectures, maybe I'll explain why that is. I probably will. TCP is voodoo magic. It's crazy. Problem 6. Now, this is the big one. Now you have a hotel. Look at you go. So successful. After I was just slandering you. At its peak, 500 people will be streaming 1080p 60 video. Like we just saw, that's about 4 megabits per second each. What is the minimum bandwidth you'd need to accommodate that? So again, that means we're going to assume 100% link usage, and we're going to ignore all HTTP stuff. Well, 500 people times 4 megabits per second, that's 2 gigabits per second. Clearly, you'd need a lot of throughput to accommodate that. And again, since we did 88% link usage earlier, it's more like 2.2, 2.5 gigabits per second. That's a lot. That is a lot. So, in conclusion, like we just saw, when you're transmitting small files, like the game server or downloading the HTTP base page, the RTT is what we say the bottleneck. And throughput matters when you're transmitting a lot of data, like we saw with the 4 gigabyte movie file, or your RTT is very small, i.e., this is when the transmission time is the delay, not the propagation speed. All right. Thanks for watching.